Hello again. Let's talk about this one more new feature that we've introduced in PD Howler 11, and it relates to the brush settings, and it is one of the post effects tools. You see that here in the effects tab. Normally when you go to the brush and you click on the settings, that's when you get the brush settings panel here. And there is this list of many parameters for the regular brushes. There's also a whole bunch of options for custom brushes. And then there is an option here for effects. And you've seen probably enabling that to get some sort of impasto mode, perhaps some gel, perhaps some watercolor, translucent watercolors with pigment lifting. So a lot of different effects here, even shadow drops, and sometimes not quite clearly visible, but anyway, so there's a lot of options, and we've also had this modal option here. We've always had that for quite a number of years, the ability to make the mode so that it's doing a post effects, that's perhaps doing an additive, subtractive, and so on. There's also a paint on alpha, and now there is one more, which is paint on RGB and alpha. Right, and so what that's about, let me show you a couple of ways to use it. First of all, let's go erase everything to white, and I'm going to start with a very simple brush first, one that has no anti-aliasing along the edges. Let's take the large one first, easy peasy. I'm going to pick a reddish color, and I'm going to select the RGB+Alpha. Right, and when you do that, and you do a refresh, you might see the screen go pink if you have the overlay mode under the selection. Right? If you don't, then it'll be more difficult to see that. In fact, you might not want it. So let's try without. And then you do a brush stroke, and there it is. Now you automatically see the marching ants appear here. Right? And you can do another brush stroke, same color if you want, and then maybe change color. And each of those will keep adding the red, green, blue colors, the RGB channels, but also the alpha channel. You can actually take a snapshot of it here from the selection store alpha, store selection. There you go. So you have a snapshot of that, but you can keep painting and perhaps change color, and you're still in this mode where it's not only drawing the RGB but also adding to the selection. Right, the selection mask. You can, in fact, if you already have a stored copy here, you can do a get alpha to get the latest copy, and there you go. You can also invert it and do a variety of other things with that. So while you're in this mode, you're not drawing just the red, green, blue, you're also drawing into the alpha. If you clear the red, green, blue, you still see the marching ants. You also could go into enabling that overlay mode. I like to use that usually. In fact, sometimes I even get rid of the alpha, the marching ants. If there are too many of them, it slows down. So I could disable that as well. So now, how do I start all over? Well, I could clear this. I could go here again. Don't just click on modal. That will not trigger a reset. What you want is select this again. Paint on RGB and alpha, and then if you zoom in or out, you might not see anything, but the moment you start painting, that first paintbrush is doing what it needs to do with the alpha. It's adding to the alpha, and so this is something you can use to create some simple graphic assets, right? Little logos, little graphic images, and or shapes, and then pick them up as something that has a transparent background, right? So these colors will be opaque. The rest around it will be transparent. I'm going to re-enable the marching ants so we see them a little bit better. And so I'm going to pick this up as a custom brush. There you go. Store as, there it is. Sorry, use selected as brush, and let me do that. So now I have it in the custom brush, and I can paint with that. It's no longer in this mode of RGB+Alpha, and so I can use the right button to erase. I can use the left button to draw. Here's another example that I took, that I created. Even added a shadow drop to that, so you can see the brush actually holds that shadow drop. Let's see how I did this one. This one actually has something else which is peculiar, because the brush, each brush stroke was going thinner, starting thin, going wide, and then turning narrow again. So let's take again, right click here on simple brush. Let's take the large one. That would be this. But I'm going to control with a post correction. I'm going to control the brush stroke so it's actually changing its size. That's a feature we introduced, I think, in version 10. And you can see it under the view menu. There it is, post correction, which brings up normally something like this, right? Or maybe there's an extra point. These are spline curves. You can grab the point. You can introduce new points and set something here. And what that curves controls is essentially a resizing of the brush along the brush stroke. So if you think about going from left to right, it's going to go up and down, and that's going to change the size along it. You have to enable it. But now if you draw from left to right and I let go, it's going to change based on this shape here, this curve. So for instance, if I say let's go from the maximum at the beginning to the minimum at the end, and do this line, it's going to produce exactly this, right? So you have a post correction, or an envelope is what we also call it. Right? So you can draw something like this, change the color, draw another one or two, and so on. So create some funky stuff. But this one is only in the red, green, blue channel. If you want the whole thing to be accompanied with a selection mask, that's what you need to enable the RGB+Alpha mode. Right, so I'm going to go do this. I'm going to erase, and I'm going to draw a first stroke up here, and then perhaps another one this way, and then change color, let's say to reddish, and another way this one, maybe a bit of yellow, a little bit of blue, and even some white, and maybe another one in white, and maybe some black as well, or really dark. There you go. So it's a collection of different colors, and what I'd like to do is pick this up as a custom brush. There may even be some pink ones. This pink around here in the background, that's not really in the red, green, blue channel. It's just a mask, or a method of showing the overlay when there is no alpha, when it's not selected. And that part I want to keep transparent. So all I got to do at this point is go to the brush menu and pick this whole thing up as a custom image. Or I could also use the custom brush pickup tool, right? If in fact I want to give it some extra margin, because if I use the brush you selected as brush, it takes the smallest rectangle that contains this shape, right? This is the tightest bounding box. And it will touch this last pixel on the left side and this rightmost pixels on the right side. It will be right smack on that edge. If I don't want that, if I want some extra margin, it's better to use the custom brush tool, the custom brush selector, because now with this you can go a little bit above, a little bit more to the left, and you can drag and select something that will have a nice solid, space margin around it. And so now you can paint. You can clear the selection mask, and you can start painting with that. It still is applying the rescaling here, right? The post correction, and so you can do some really funky stuff with that. You can go and it actually has something else here at the end. I'm not sure exactly what that is, but it seems like there is some extra thing happening. There is a couple of other examples. This one here looks pretty cool. You can do all sorts of things with this post correction envelope in the first place. You might start small, go really big, and then go back small, and it's almost like you have a tablet pressure applied to it, and you don't. I'm using a mouse here, but it's simulating a tablet pressure. You can even have the angle changed around, right? If you click this, where is it? This one here. That's use the direction of the pointer motion to determine the angle of the brush. So it's going to also change the orientation of it as you're doing your brush stroke. Actually, maybe you need to enable the custom brush transform for that. Oh, it already is. So, you know what? Maybe I had this. I turned it off. It was already on. There you go. Now it's rotating the way I was hoping to see it. So you see I would do this, but when I let go, it's resizing it based on this post correction. All right, so back to what I really wanted to show. It's the special mode here for RGB plus alpha, right? So essentially, in this mode, what we're drawing is going into the alpha channel as well as into the red, green, blue channel. And so with that, and it doesn't matter which brush it is, it could be a custom brush, an internal brush, it's going to generate a selection mask along that environment and along that path. And so with that, you can create fairly sophisticated shapes or images or assets that you can easily see contain opaque pixels where you painted and transparent pixels left on the outside where the alpha channel was not touched, and the RGB channel, well, wasn't touched either, but we wouldn't care, we wouldn't see it. You can easily use the brush you selected as brush, pick that up, and now you have a new brush asset with nice solid pixels inside and transparent all around it. Now, this worked really nicely with the simple brush because it's either all solid or all transparent, and it's a little bit blocky when you zoom in here. You can start seeing the pixels. But if you have a bit of an anti-aliasing along the edges, that may be a little bit more difficult. So it's not doing everything, but it can work in a number of scenarios. Let's take, for instance, this one here. I'm going to use the default brush, which is the airbrush for large airbrush, right? And I'm going to draw something in, let's say, some green, something like this. But again, I do have the post correction there too. So it's changing the size. I'm going to have it all the way down, or so I thought. Let me grab it. Yep. And go all the way up to the biggest size, maybe a little bit earlier along the path, and then kind of thin it down. So you can see a very long, very lengthy stroke here, very long path where it's very thin. Maybe that's a little bit too much, something like this. Okay, so I want to do that, and again I want to have, let me clear that, you want to have the red, green, blue, and alpha, RGB and alpha. And so this time I'm going to go with let's say sort of a reddish orange color, and let's say I'm doing something like this here. Go like this, and you see how it turned it pink because of my overlay mode in the selection, right? Let's do without. And so we don't get this distraction with the orange, with the pink coloration. But you see the brush strokes are subject to the post correction, and they're generating the alpha channel. You see the marching ants there? They're painting into the alpha channel as well. Right? That's because I have the RGB+A, RGB+Alpha enabled. All right, I can have that in a few other colors, and perhaps a few more. Perhaps a few other colors, and let's say perhaps a yellowish, something like this. All right, so at this point I have some brush strokes that did have some smoothing, some anti-aliasing along the edges, right? Many times that's going to be difficult to have some really clean pictures without the glow, but let's see what we have here. I'm going to go pick this up as a custom brush as usual, and so now I have it here, not at full opacity yet. Let me make sure I adjust the brush opacity to full. There it is. And at this point we shouldn't be in the RGB alpha mode anymore. It might not reflect that in the interface here. It still shows enable, but if I paint with this, yeah, it's not painting into the alpha anymore. Once I've picked it up, it's that mode is gone. And it's still though doing the post correction, so that takes a little time. You notice if I, for instance, if I change the angle, something like this here, it's also rescaling it now with the post correction. Let's say I'm done with that and I don't want it. Let's just disable it. So now all I'm doing is painting like this. I might not want the rotation to take effect. So it's keeping the same orientation. So now we can really see what's happening with that brush. Is it clean? Well, no, there's a little bit of a glow. You see the blue ones here? There is a little bit of a white glow along it. That's because of the anti-aliasing along that edge. To some extent, and to quite some good extent, we can actually correct that. Not always, and it depends a bit on exactly what was done, but let's give it a try here. Brush menu, go to pre-multiply correction, and say that it was white background, right? You choose a couple of options here, whatever color you may have in the primary or in the secondary color selections, those are those two, or the preset black or white. Let's go with the white, and what that does is it tries to fix the glow that was white along the blue, and it actually did, but it actually also sometimes overshoots. Like the green one, it did a little bit too much, and now it's actually darkening a little bit. Has a little bit of a darken there. Not huge though, right? So this might be a perfectly acceptable asset that you created that way. And that's one thing I wanted to show you. This is new in Howler 11. It's kind of the start of something. We're not quite sure yet where we'll take this. Maybe we'll need this if we add some fully alpha-based opacity on the layers. That will be perhaps in the future. Don't have it, didn't quite make it in version 11, but at least we have some tool here that could be quite useful to create some graphic assets that need to have transparent background but appear fully opaque in there. And again, granted, it's not going to cover every type of brush. There's a lot of sophistication in some of these brushes, right? So, but give it a try. Like for instance, here under the oils, you could go to totally oil and see what that looks like. And if you think that that might look really funky and you might want to have that in one of your objects or graphic assets, let's do that. For instance, let's say with a little bit darker. Something like that, or bluish. Hello, there you go. Let's go and enable, again, settings, and go to the effects tab, select modal, and go to RGB, and really select that mode. It's not enough to just click this radio button here for modal. You have to go to select this. That will trigger the initialization of the alpha channel to be fully transparent. And so let's say we go draw something like this. Now see, that one here is a little bit different. That one is going to be a challenge. You can tell the marching ants go way outside here, because the blue is not the only place where things are happening here. We're smearing things in. This is a smear brush that's taking in a lot more than the part you see in the end. And the reach of that brush is much wider, right? So that's probably going to be outside of the scope of what you can do with this particular thing. I mean, you can paint it, right? And if you decide to keep the overlay mode enabled, you see where the brush did go, and you can certainly do some funky stuff with it. But that's going to have a very serious glow around it. This is not really a glow, but it's going to be there. So if you go and pick this up as a custom brush, something like this, you got that into custom brush, and all around it is transparent, so that works, right? But it still has that very blobby white glow around it. So this is one where you could potentially do some other stuff and perhaps reduce it, but it's not going to reduce it by virtue of using the the pre-multiply correction, right? There's much more to it than pre-multiply correction that we need here. This would be perhaps something you could to some extent adjust by shrinking or growing the alpha or the selection mask, right? This is under transparency, grow or shrink key. If you reduce the key, that's curly brace open, and you do this a few times. I'm going to use a keyboard shortcut here. So shift curly brace. As you keep doing that, you may look at the white edges. In fact, let me erase to the foreground. There you go. It's all black even. Let's go erase to black. There you go. So here's the brush, and look at as I'm using shift curly brace, it keeps shrinking the alpha, or the parts, the white parts, but it's not going to line up on that blue, right? It's not quite that clever. So anyway, so that may be one that's a little bit beyond the scope of what we want to do or what we can do. But have a look at these. Some of these are going to be quite surprisingly good, like Rake 100. Let's see what happens with that one. Let's go with sort of a dark brownish color. Erase to white. Well, this time let's erase to black. Why not? Let's go erase to black, and start painting. Now this one is dark. I'm going to go with a light. There you go. Okay, so we have a rake brush. Let's go enable the post correction. Yep, that works too. Looks almost like tufts of hair. Oh, hold on. No, maybe I'm going to erase the set the erase color to black here. Switch to 2 there. Okay, so I'm going to erase to a very light golden yellow. There you go. So I want something like this, and as I'm painting that, I want the alpha channel to be selected with that as well. All right, so let's erase. Let's go enable FX Modal RGB+Alpha. Let's go there and start drawing. And now we got this alpha. You get the marching ants, and it is very bright, and it also takes a lot of time because there's many strands of these that have that. So this is one where you might actually want to disable the visibility of that. Right? It's called the show marching ants. I would disable that because it's actually putting a lot of strain on the system refresh. It's quite slow. So this way you can go paint your stuff, and you know it's also painting the alpha. And we didn't have to do anything with layers here. So it's painting this into the alpha. If we want, we can now show the alpha, the marching ants, and we can pick this all up into a custom brush. Right? Once again, brush, use selected as brush. All right, so now it's there in the brush as a custom brush. I'm going to go make it fully opaque, but you can tell there is transparent parts to it. I'm going to now erase to black and paint with that. Right, and this has a little bit of blackness to it. These strands are darker than maybe they were initially, so we might again want to do the post correction on that. Brush, pre-multiply correction. This time it's not against white. This time the color, background color was black, and do that. So that may help, and it sure does. Seems like it's a little bit better. All right, so hopefully that will give you some ideas of things to try to create some rather funky and fancy assets that were painted with some interesting brushes, or very simple ones. Right? If you do pixel art, this is all you need to do. Just a small, medium, or large simple brush, and with that you get to create some interesting shapes, something like this and beyond. All right, thanks for watching, and have fun waffling and howling.